The amount of resentment that then goes into the toxic cycle. And so now you guys are getting triggered over breathing in a way that the other person doesn't like, because there's just so much resentment that you stop really even liking each other as a person.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more, all to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Eyes Wide Open. Thank you for joining us today. We have a special guest who is actually a friend of mine, a new friend of mine that I met through a podcast episode that we did for her show. And then we did an episode for my show, making Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick the first two-time guest here on Eyes Wide Open. So what do we want to talk about today? I wanted to talk about toxic cycles and toxic traits in relationships and what causes them, how to recognize them, how to break them, or when to know to leave a relationship. Dr. Liz is a licensed therapist. She's a relationship expert. She is also a relationship and intimacy coach. So she's got all sorts of experience to walk us through what happens to create a toxic cycle, what's actually going on when you're in the toxic cycle. And we will take that and learn a little bit about how toxicity happens in a relationship, how to change it, or when it's time to walk away. So without further ado, let's get to this interview so you can go through and into relationships with your eyes wide open. Today is a big day because we have our first guest for the second time on the show, and that is Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. Dr. Liz is a licensed professional counselor, relationship and intimacy coach, host of the Relatable Relationships Unfiltered podcast, and my friend. Thank you for coming here today. How are you?
Hi, Nick. I am so happy to be here, and such an honor that I am the first two-time appearance. I will definitely take that as an honor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, your plaque's in the mail. I expect it to go somewhere in between.
Absolutely. I'll get you a lit up one like that with the name of your show, and I'll just be like, I'm part of this too.
Yeah, you're part of the family now. You're part of the family. So how are you doing today? What's going on?
Doing well. Normal stuff with coaching. The coaching stuff is picking up a lot. So still doing therapy at the practice. Our third location opens up next month. So that is exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then, just building with the coaching as well, which has been really neat to be able to just work with really people all over the world and just in different cultures and settings. So I've been really enjoying that. And then, as I was telling you before we started filming, my book is out next month as well. So needless to say, I've been very busy.
That's awesome. And we'll make sure we put the book link in the bio too. Before we get started, and we're going to dive into that because I want to talk more about your relationship coaching and your experiences and all of that. But when you were on here last time, we talked about what you wanted to be when you grow up, when you were growing up, which is my favorite question to ask people now. But what we learned, to recap, you wanted to be a farmer. And then as you got into high school, you wanted to be a cosmetologist. So instead of asking that question again, and I'm hoping this one gives a different answer, but if today mental health counseling went away, there was no more relationship coaching, what would you wake up tomorrow and do with your time?
Probably become a farmer and then maybe a cosmetologist. That is a solid question. I would first take a vacation because Lord knows I need it. So I'd probably get a few days of sleep in, and then, that's a really good question. Something entrepreneurial for sure. It would probably be open up, if I wasn't doing something mental health, I would be owning a business of some sort. And so it'd probably just be figuring out what that new passion would be.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Well, you never know.
Although no. Could you not jinx that? Jeez. I do know. It better not be going away.
It's like, well, I guess, mental health counseling is one of the booming industries to be in now too, which is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's such.
And your third clinic.
Which shows you, definitely the demand. And I as cliched as it sounds, like I am so grateful because to be able to do this thing that I am so passionate about. It's not, of course, a job is a job in a lot of ways. Like we still have to get up, we still have to get ready, we still have to be responsible, all of those things. But to be able to go sit with people and really connect on the level that we do, and to be able to be trusted with their story and their experiences. And like, I am so blessed. That's for sure.
And is your third clinic, all three of them are in Arizona, right?
Yep. Yeah. They make a kind of a straight line across what we call the valley. So yeah, it goes straight across.
That's cool. Well, congratulations. That's a big accomplishment, although I'm sure a lot of work for you.
Yeah. Yes. A lot of work for me. And as you know, Richard, who's my trusted helper as well, he is definitely supporting me in that process. So shout out to him.
Shout out to Richard. And for the audience, who is Richard? Because this is a great segue into what we're going to talk about today.
Richard is my ex-husband and my absolute best friend in the entire world. And we were laughing last night. We went to dinner. We bought our son his first car. He's going to be 16 in July. Oh. And so we were all at dinner after we got the car, and we went to Olive Garden, and very fancy, I know.
Best Italian you can get, according to my dad.
It's so good. So he's like looking at the menu, and I'm like, bro, you know what you're going to get. And then I go to order, and he looks at me and starts laughing. He's like, you've ordered the same thing forever as well. And we were like, 21 years of ordering the same exact thing at this restaurant. And then we were like, wait, can you believe we've spent the last 21 years together and not even married the last 3.5? Wow. So yeah, we are definitely each other's ride or die. That's for sure.
And what is that meal that you've been ordering for 21 years?
Well, the fettuccine Alfredo chicken, of course, and his being the chicken Parmesan. So
okay.
Yeah, the most generic options.
Hey, when I go there, I do fettuccine Alfredo too. So no judgment there.
Yes.
Delicious. Today, we are going to talk about toxic relationship patterns, how to break that cycle, which is something I know you work on, sure, obviously in your counseling practice, but also with your coaching, which is interesting because a lot of people probably are like, well, what's the difference? So I thought maybe we could start out with you saying, what's the difference between your relationship coaching versus your counseling practice?
Yeah, I love that. I love the opportunity to explain the difference. So essentially with the coaching, it is not any mental, emotional, psychological diagnosing, treatment. We don't address symptoms of anxiety, depression, trauma. We don't address anything like that. It is all very much based on behavioral concerns, so patterns. It's setting goals for the future. So it's talking through, we do explore kind of the different themes in their life about how they got to where they are, and then how that's showing up for them currently, especially when it comes to the toxic cycle. And then we identify, what can we do about this? How can we start showing up differently? And then allow time for adaptation, time for change. And so the biggest thing is that when I start working with a client, if I notice, so I always do a consultation first before meeting with a coaching client, because I want to make sure they're not coming to me thinking that it's therapy or that we're going to be doing anything therapeutic in that way. And so I always explain to them the difference in the consultation call, and then I give them an opportunity to share with me what's going on. And so I pick up on if it is more counseling that they're looking for. And I just had this conversation with somebody last week. I said, I can certainly help you with the relational, it was toxic cycle that he was coming for. And of course I can help you with that, but you either need to do counseling simultaneously so that you're addressing these other things, or you need to go do counseling first and then come back to me to address this specific aspect. And so that's what he decided to do, is counseling first, and then, said he'd reach out later. But obviously with therapy being my passion, and that's how I identify as a therapist, I am very sensitive to the difference between the two.
Which I think is good, because you also don't want to end up in a toxic relationship with your clients that need something counseling wise and not coaching wise. And so
right. And just from an ethical lens, that's like, if they're needing something that I can't offer in the coaching context. And I always tell people that on the consultation call, that This isn't a sales call. This isn't a pitch. This is me finding out if I can truly help you. And if not, if I can guide you to where you can go to get the help you need.
Right. Which is also useful because one thing, and I know you know this better than I do, but I feel like people don't really know how to get started with a counselor or therapy.
Yeah, it's for sure.
Yeah. And that is, I refer people to people all the time that I know, and they're just like, they just don't know. And now I'm kind of like, hey, let me make your first appointment for you so that you just have to show up, because even sending that email or that website, that intake form or whatever, even that's a big undertaking for someone who's doing this for the first time. So
for sure. And I tell people Psychology Today, which I need to get sponsored through them because of how many people I refer that direction. But that is my favorite source of like, go on, you can filter through people, you can filter based on your need, insurance. That's really, and then they make it so easy just to send a message. You don't even have to send an email. You just hit contact and it's super easy.
I think that has to be how I found mine. It's been a long time. I don't remember, but it was very much like a database, and I just read profiles. Yeah. What were the areas of expertise? Who'd they like working with? And I got lucky. Like the first one I really liked, but,
well, and that's important to even touch on that's amazing when you do get lucky, but you don't always get lucky, and finding a therapist is like dating. And so if you don't connect, if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel seen, heard, validated, move on to the next. Like that, you're not going to get anything out of it if it's not the right fit.
That's exactly right. And don't be discouraged. Sometimes it takes a few times. And like you said, sometimes you get lucky, but other times it takes a few times.
For sure.
We've talked about this, I believe, on your show before. Not necessarily this word, but people throw around words like narcissist, toxic, all of these bipolar, all of these sort of diagnoses or these buzzwords, right? To you, what is toxic? How should it be used? What's your assessment of how it is used kind of casually? And then what's the toxic cycle?
How I would describe toxic would be something that is unhealthy, unsafe. It creates activity in your nervous system. And the toxic cycle is basically that. So unhealthy and unsafe, but it's on loop. And so the toxic cycle is when two individuals or more, but let's say for the sake of this conversation, two individuals have an inability to treat each other in the way that they each need to be treated in that dynamic. So in a healthy, appropriate way, meeting each other's needs, showing up for each other, yet they're also unwilling to remove themselves permanently from the relationship. And so they stay in it and they talk about how mistreated they are, how much they're a victim to this, but they don't remove themselves. And so what we see from the cycle is there's this infatuation phase where they're all about each other. They're just obsessed with each other. Often something happens to trigger one or the other. So something is said, something is done. It can be very minor. The trigger in the one person, the way they react to that, triggers the other person, which then creates conflict. The conflict blows up out of control. Things are said and done that both individuals get hurt. This often leads to one or both abandoning. So there's a separation in the dynamic. Some time goes by and somebody puts out feelers, reaches out. The other one slowly starts to warm up. They come back into this dynamic, but nothing is discussed because heaven forbid, we know how easy it is to get triggered in this dynamic, right? So nothing is worked through. We're just going to pretend like nothing happened and we're back to infatuation. And that is the toxic cycle.
That is so relatable, ironically.
Yeah, it really is for so many of us.
Yeah, I think so many of us are in a toxic cycle. Even if the relationship isn't necessarily doomed, I think we all sort of have these cycles that we get ourselves into, and sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. But what do you think is, in your experience now with coaching, I would say more specifically, what type of triggers are people getting? Are they coming from past relationships? Are they coming from family life? Is it a mix of all of it? Like what causes us build up these emotions where our nervous system just enters fight or flight.
Yeah, so important to understand because this can help to really normalize it for a lot of people. I think I kind of spoke on this last time we talked on your pod, so I will kind of repeat myself a little bit here, but what really is important to understand in this dynamic of getting triggered is the way the amygdala works. And so the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain, right? And we've talked through this, and it is designed to store sensory memory. And so any threats or experiences that you've had in the past that have created fear or a traumatic response for you gets stored in the amygdala, but all of the sensory components of it get stored. And so when you get triggered, it doesn't have to be an exact situation. It can be anything that reminds any of your senses of this previous threat, which then sends you into a threat state. And so then what happens when your amygdala is fired is it releases all these biochemicals that send your body into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But for the sake of this conversation, the fight or flight. And so when you do that, you are now reacting often in an aggressive, or so it's either that you get reactive or you shut down. It's often that behavior that then triggers your partner, because if you get reactive, that can be scary and remind them of something from their childhood or a previous relationship. If you shut down and withdraw, that can trigger things such as rejection and abandonment. And then, as we know, that the trigger cycle gets pretty activated.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, have you been in any toxic relationships that you want to share what your cycle was?
Yeah, so very similar. So the relationship that I was in after my divorce was very reactive in that way. And I talk about it in my book. And I talk about that it could be something as simple as a facial expression would create an activation in me because it would remind me my dad was so scary to me that it would be something as simple as him coming home with the scowl on his face. I didn't know what that meant, and I was not going to find out. And so with this partner, there was a lot of similarities to both of my parents, but really to my dad in that way. And so it would be something as simple as his face shifting, and I would become reactive. I would get defensive, and then, as you and I have discussed many a times with our snarkiness that can sometimes come up when we feel threatened, I would make a comment, which then would activate that. But yeah, I mean, that's a big part of my book as I talk about the toxic relationship. Even as a relationship expert, I got sucked into, to be fair, I didn't become a relationship expert until this relationship because it made me aware of, like, I need to check in on this. I need to grow my awareness around all of this.
Right. The snarky comments will get you every time in that situation when you're in any kind of conflict. I feel like I have a certain amount of snarkiness that I have to get out in a day. Certain amount of sarcasm, however you want to put it. And I have found that I can do it in the comments on Instagram. And it kind of gives me like a little bit of a release. And
that is so funny. Richard was telling me that about that a couple of weeks ago. He was like, yeah, sometimes I just like to poke at people just because they're easy to poke at, like in the comment section. I'm like, who has time for that?
I mean,
sounds like you and Richard would be great friends.
Yeah, he and I should start a support group. Maybe that would be
for sure. Support each other.
Yeah. It's funny because I usually won't do it right away. And if I see like a comment that I just think needs something, I'll be like, you know what, just stop. But if I'm thinking about it later, I'm like, forget it. I'm going on Instagram.
I'm going in. That's hilarious. Yeah. I mean, you and I have definitely talked about that, which I think is why we have such a funny banter often, because that our brains are wired very similarly in that way, which can be fun and can create really fun conversation, as you and I know, but can also get us both into trouble when we're not using it wisely.
I mean, when I was younger, before therapy and learning to respond instead of react, would I do it? I knew I was doing it. I wanted to do it. I didn't care I was doing it, and I was going to make my point. And I think that's it's kind of a normal thing, right? To be reactive instead of responsive.
And that is the amygdala. I mean, that is exactly that is the trauma trigger, is that our brains are designed to react. Because when you think about it in terms of caveman times, when this part of the brain, regardless of your views on all of that, from a neurological perspective, when that part of our brain was developing and we didn't have time to slow down to really, tap into our logical self-talk to want to know, should I run from the saber-toothed tiger or not? You had to react. Right. And when you think about the value of it, even in present day situations, so let's say you're driving on the freeway and you see somebody about to merge into your lane, your ability to react really quickly actually keeps you safe in a lot of situations. And so it is being able to decipher and distinguish between when that quick reaction is needed and when it feels like we're in a threat. But just because somebody's facial expression shifts doesn't actually mean I'm in a threat state. It just means I'm feeling afraid.
Right, exactly. Whether it's warranted for the situation or not. That makes perfect sense. You know what's interesting, thinking about like the cavemen, I was talking, I think it was with TJ Power. He's a neuroscientist a few months back. And he was talking about how and go listen to that episode if you haven't already. It's one of my favorites. And I think we talked about it on the episode, not off, but he was saying the thing that is so challenging now is we went thousands of years and our brains were being programmed, as you're saying, to like run from the saber-toothed tiger. Don't think about it. And, he talks a lot about dopamine and how social media and porn and all of this stuff just gives you a quick dopamine hit where you used to have to work for it. And now you don't have to work for it. We found many ways to achieve it quickly. And therefore, we lose a lot of motivation because if our brain's asking for dopamine, we go and we pick up TikTok or Instagram. And so it's interesting because in the last 100 years, since the Industrial Revolution, really, like everything has changed at rapid speed compared to what it was for thousands of years before that, for the invention of obviously manufacturing, technology, automation, cell phones, social media, the internet, AI now, all that stuff. And our brains and our body chemistry just hasn't been able to catch up to modern world. And I think it's so interesting and fascinating to think about that.
Yeah. And I think that, the modern world then plays into our modern day relationships and all of the stressors that even when you think about that, the whole online world and the impact that's had on relationships and that's had on toxic cycles and all of that. I agree. That plays a tremendous role in the conflict we experience.
That's one of my things I wanted to ask you about. How does social media play into the toxic cycle, or at least in your experiences?
Yeah. And I think because there's the comparison, there's the tendency for people to get jealous a lot quicker and a lot more often, because I hear often that people are monitoring comments that are made or who's liking what, with their partner, who they're following. My teenage son was just talking about this the other day, that one of his girlfriends broke up with him because he wouldn't stop following another girl. I mean, this is like everywhere. And it would be so easy to say, oh yeah, teenagers, huh? But no, I sit with grown adults who are saying these same things. And quite honestly, I use social media as well when, like, if I'm interested in somebody or I'll go and look and see, who are they following? Who are they interacting with? How are they interacting? I use that as a gauge. And so while I'm using it to put up a wall and keep myself safe from the get-go.
I was going to say, is this healthy? Because if you're
okay, here we go.
I know. Yeah, you're now going on blast.
Okay, so go ahead.
If you're dating someone, hopefully they're respecting the relationship with their social media activity. But if you're getting to know someone who's single, isn't it kind of their freedom to behave the way that they want?
1,000%, 1,010%. However, if a male who I'm interested in is following a bunch of accounts with naked women, that is my personal preference. That is not, I'm not a really important person. Like I did a bunch of work in sex trafficking years ago in terms of like advocacy and for a nonprofit and stuff like that. And so I have the knowledge I have of behind the scenes of a lot of that stuff, which I'm not saying is across the board. I'm not trying to wind anyone up here, but the knowledge that I have on some of that stuff makes me just really not interested in that world. And so if I see a man that is just his norm, he's following tons and tons of accounts like that. I just know our values aren't going to align. And so that's usually what I'm looking at.
I think that's totally fair. That's totally fair.
But yes, I mean, just women in general. I'm not being like, oh, you follow a woman, so you're out.
Well, right. Hey, I guess a good gauge is if they have an OnlyFans, you probably shouldn't be following them if they want to date you.
Well, I mean, I guess that could be something to check into as well.
What did you do with sex trafficking advocacy, by the way? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so in my undergrad internship, in Phoenix, they were putting in a home for teenage girls who have, Phoenix has a pretty big, however we would put that. There's a big problem with sex trafficking in the Phoenix area. And I was at our church at the time. I had seen like a documentary. And so I got connected with them because I knew at that time, which I've talked to you about before, that I wanted to do work with adolescent females. I talk about that a lot. That's how I first got into the field. And so I thought that really pulled on my heart. And so we would do screenings for the documentary that was created. And then I actually helped the facility to get licensed through DES and stuff like that. So wow. I did, like a lot of that type of advocacy stuff early on.
No, that's good. That's huge work. And, it's interesting. And I do think about this, but it's also, there's a few things in this world that I don't want to think about. Like, I just can't. It's too much. And sex trafficking, as big of an issue as it is one of them, where when I really start to think about it, I get sick to my stomach, and it just wears me out, and I feel bad about that. But, being able to hear you get involved and help out that organization it's good, because it is an issue and we don't talk about it enough. And it literally just is, it's children. Like, what are we doing? It's awful.
Well, and sometimes children or adults or whatever the case, the fact is it's going on in your backyard. And that is, so not to derail this conversation, but that is something that the documentary spoke about a lot, that one of the individuals that was part of this group, like, she got picked up at a Scottsdale mall. Like, it's happening literally in your backyard. Right
in front of your face too.
Yeah.
That's awful. So back to toxic cycles, I guess, right?
Yes.
How can you identify like red flags? I know we actually probably covered a lot of this on your show a couple of weeks ago, but how can you identify red flags or that you are in a toxic cycle? Obviously, you can say what you did earlier, but what are some of the things you can pay attention to?
So being aware of if conflict is frequent, so it's happening, and frequent is obviously a subjective term, but if it's happening to the point where it's like, this is exhausting, this is draining, this feels really excessive, that is something to check into. And then the other component of that is that when you come back together, if there is not discussion around what led to that conflict, if there is not problem solving and resolution that comes out of that, basically you just brush it under the rug, which was a big part of the toxic cycle I was caught up in, then is a really good sign that you are in a toxic cycle. Because like I said earlier, it's the fear of, if we try to even bring this up to talk through it, it's just going to lead to another fight. So let's just go back to the infatuation stage instead.
Which doesn't have much longevity. So that's
it doesn't have any, because the amount of resentment that then goes into the toxic cycle. And so now you guys are getting triggered over breathing in a way that the other person doesn't like, because there's just so much resentment that you stop really even liking each other as a person. That's often another sign of this.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really interesting because I've experienced that before in the past where it would be like these little things didn't bother me and then they started bothering me. And it was like that resentment and that frustration, and it also probably creates more trauma. So now you're taking more trauma into your next relationship if it doesn't work out, and then you're kind of like spilling that on somebody else, and someone else is probably doing the same thing to you, and if you don't work on it or talk about it, you're never going to solve it.
Well, and more trauma even in that current relationship, because now you're creating an evidence log to support that you have an inability to have a hard conversation with this person. And so you just assume that every time something feels uncomfortable, we know how this is going to go. So we're not even going to attempt it. And or you start sabotaging it because you already figure you know how it's going to go. So yeah, I mean, that increased trauma impacts even that current relationship that you're in.
How can you break free from this? Obviously, you don't want to give away the farm because this is how you work with people. But what's the first step? Maybe obviously getting therapy or a coach or something. But how can you get out of it?
No, I mean, come pet the farm animals. I'm happy to give away as much information as I can because, again, my passion is to help people, and so no, I'm happy to talk through some of these steps that definitely need to take place. And the first is that awareness has to happen. So anyone who finds themselves in a toxic cycle, you need to start increasing awareness around your own triggers and how you're showing up in that relationship. What I really encourage people to do is to create a timeline, starting from their very early life experiences all the way to present day, and for them to really understand what are the themes and where are they coming from, how are they showing up currently.
I had to do that.
You did that in your therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is so important. That's how you understand, like, this is why I keep getting triggered. But I think the beautiful thing is if you're coupled up with somebody, share your timelines with each other. So that is something that I do early on when I coach with, like a couple together, is that we'll do the timeline activity together. And so that you have understanding of each other's themes, and that really helps you to be a little more sensitive when the other person gets triggered. And then the next part of that is once you understand your triggers, you have to increase emotional regulation. And as you and I both know, that is being able to, being able to calm down when you get reactive. And that we just don't have enough time for me to go through all the different ways to do that. But at that point, it's really like seek some professional help. And if you're not able to, then Google emotional regulation skills.
Right.
You have access to the tools.
Right. Or get a journal and a workbook. That's the thing I think too, is it can get overwhelming because we went through attachment styles when I was just kind of learning about it. And it's overwhelming when you go and you research sometimes. So I understand that too. But if you don't have the resources, because we don't all have access to mental health support, we don't all have access to relationship coaching. We all probably have generational trauma that, I think specifically like our age group and millennials are trying to break now.
Right.
So starting online can be a little bit overwhelming, but I encourage people to like start somewhere. Just pick a reputable site and go read about it and learn some sources that you can use from these reputable sources.
Yeah. And even as much as social media is not therapy, we all know that, we get it. That doesn't mean there aren't really good social media accounts out there that provide valuable information. And that's a big part of what I'm putting out is not, yes, I do put out some quotes and some things that are just thought provoking, but I really try to put out, as don't give away the farm. Like I give away the farm every single day. Like I literally give people the steps every day in my social media so that they don't have to get overwhelmed by the internet. They have it right there in front of them.
Yeah. And I agree. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on to talk about this was a post that you had a while ago about the toxic cycle. And one of the things that you said was, you hear all the time, when it's good, it's good. And, I'm air quoting that for those of you just listening. When it's good, it's good. What what is wrong with us, because I'm guilty, that we think that makes the poor behavior acceptable?
So we are programmed through something called an intermittent reward system. So there's multiple different types of reward systems that when it comes to behavioral psychology that gets us to act in a certain way or form a habit. Intermittent reward system is one of the most effective ways to get a new behavior to stick because it creates an addiction of sorts. This is what slot machines use. This is when somebody is a drug addict or a substance abuser. What happens is that you put in the coin and nothing happens. You put another coin, nothing happens, put another one, and then there's this big payout. And so we believe that it's worth it. And going back to your statement about dopamine, dopamine is a pleasure-seeking neurotransmitter. So that dopamine is not about obtaining the prize. It's about seeking the prize. And that is when we get really lit up. And so every time we put in the coin and we sit back and we just wait in anticipation of something going to happen, that's what happens in these toxic cycles, is that we send the text and we sit back and wait. We try to make the phone call. They might answer, they might not. We walk by them if we know, we're going to be in the same place. We do these things to maybe get their attention or maybe not. And while we can take a few times of not getting it, we know that once we finally do, it's going to be so overwhelming and so infatuating that it hooks us. And so that's what's going on. It creates literally an addiction.
That's so crazy to think about that. But I mean, I had a lot of toxic relationships when I was younger. It's crazy. You just keep going back, and sometimes it takes a couple of weeks, but you always kind of go back to that infatuation stage, and it is like an addiction. That's kind of scary.
Well, and especially if that was what was role model for us. So as I've been writing my book, it was really interesting because I go through my timeline, and that's the premise of how I really teach this stuff, is by going through my story. And I talk about how my parents literally had a toxic relationship. And it kind of, as I was writing it, I was like, holy cow, like I didn't even realize truly the extent, even, as a relationship expert reflecting back, it's like, okay, yeah, I see that it was dysfunctional. But when I really sat with it, they had what I just described, like a true toxic cycle. And so that's what was role modeled for me for, 30 plus years at that point of when I was then in one. And so that was the norm, that chaos of one day we're just like so in love and so can't get enough of each other. And the next day it's just chaos and explosiveness over what? I mean, a lot of times we don't even know.
Well, and if you, as you mentioned earlier, your dad would come home with a scowl on his face and you knew you just had to kind of avoid him. That's like you walking on eggshells, which I know is another thing you've talked about before with the cycle. Like you're just walking on eggshells, and then the more you walk on eggshells, the more you're ready to snap and the more irritable you get. And that's half the time, I don't even think it's about what you're arguing about in the moment. It's about everything else that's already happened that you have tucked away and not dealt with.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things that I like to talk about when it comes to toxic cycles is that in order for a toxic cycle to exist, there has to be two participants. There has to be more than one. So one person, there's often like the codependent narcissistic dance that gets talked about when it comes to toxic cycles. And while that is true and accurate, and the narcissist often gets villainized and they're made out to be the bad guy and the codependent is the victim, and they are just trying to make everything okay, and they're not doing anything wrong. That's not how this works. So in order to be part of a toxic cycle, they both contribute to the cycle. They both have a role. And that's one of the most empowering things when you really learn about the toxic cycle, is that as much as you might feel powerless to it, you might feel like the victim, there's so much within your circle of control that you can either change to improve the relationship or to remove yourself from it. But in order for this cycle to exist, you each have a role.
Yeah. I think that's one of the hardest things to look at, because if you don't put up the boundaries or you don't enforce the boundaries, you can put them up all day. If you're not going to enforce them, it doesn't matter. You don't do that, you're an equal contributor to that toxic cycle. So
Yeah.
when should someone know it's time to walk away and break the toxic cycle?
So if both partners are not equally invested in making change, they're not both equally invested in doing the healing that is required from their upbringings, from their previous relationships, and then each putting in the efforts to increase emotional regulation, to show up differently, the relationship is not going to work. So in the same way that it takes two people for the cycle to exist, it takes two people to repair the cycle. And a lot of people, I get a lot of pushback on trying to imply that my response is you just have to leave the toxic cycle if you're in one. I've never said that, nor do I claim that, nor do I believe that. I do believe that two people can get healthy and they can do their own healing and they can learn new skills and they can work it out 100%. But both people have to be committed.
Yeah, that's part of your whole program is we can work to break the toxic cycle if you both are invested in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if only one person is invested, then it's time to leave.
That's a sign. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh. So I think a lot of people will jump into another relationship or start dating the next day or whatever. But you do that, you don't do the self-reflection and see your role you played in. Obviously, you could end up in a similar situation. But at the same time, you now have built, you've changed your fight or flight, your nervous system according to that relationship. So now you might have an opportunity for a healthy relationship, but you're sabotaging. So how do you heal? How do you prepare yourself to enter into a relationship and know that, like, you may get triggered sometimes, and that's okay. We're all going to trigger each other at some point. But how do you heal enough that you can actually go into a relationship that, may or may not be healthy, but hopefully is healthy, and be your best self, leaving that experience behind?
Yeah. So real healing takes place both internally and externally. There's a common misconception that you have to love yourself before you can be loved. That is really almost impossible because we learn what love is by how we feel it coming from others, the connection. Humans are designed for connection. I say that over and over and over, and it's so true. We are literally designed to be in connection and intimacy with other humans. And so to put this expectation that you have to learn to love yourself before you can enter a relationship, no, that's not the expectation. But you should consider going to therapy, maybe doing some EMDR, doing some trauma work around healing your attachment wounds, healing your traumas, understanding your triggers. And when you increase that awareness, then, and the time frame is going to look different for everyone. I mean, it could be weeks, it could be months, it's going to look different. But when you truly can understand and self-reflect on what your role was in that previous relationship, what you're bringing to the table, then you can enter into a relationship. And that's where you start to get some of that external healing, when you can really gain these corrective experiences. So evidence to support that people can be safe. But both is needed to heal. You need both the internal trauma work and the external corrective experiences.
And just for those who don't know, can you elevator pitch EMDR therapy?
Yeah. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what it is, it works to reprocess when you experience something traumatic, and trauma being defined as anything that shatters your worldview. So the way you once saw the world, you no longer see it that way anymore. Or it can be defined as something that really overwhelms your nervous system. And when we have that experience, which is very subjective for everybody, there's no trauma that's valid and no trauma that's invalid. Trauma is trauma. Yeah. When that happens, it gets stored on this messed up shelf in your head is how I talk about it with my clients, that really stays active, taunting you. And what I mean by messed up is it's like this kind of like island of misfits of it just stays active, and it can pop up at any time because it hasn't been processed. And so what EMDR does is, we just, in a quick way to explain it, through bilateral stimulation of the brain, so lighting up one side of the brain and then the other, we're targeting certain memories. And so we can work to reprocess them. So we work to desensitize so they're not as active. And then we work to shift the beliefs around them. And so then when you are exposed to something that maybe would have triggered you in the past, you're not going to be as reactive. And again, that's a very simplistic. So any therapist listening, do not judge me. That is a very simplistic explanation.
You're going to get yourself canceled over that. No, I'm kidding.
Seriously.
No, I think that was good. Very much in layperson's terms. So thank you for that. You actually changed my worldview on you have to be healed before you go go spread it on someone else. And I saw this meme a while ago that was like, heal your wounds so you don't go bleed on somebody else. And I think like, when I think about that, like that makes sense to me. But I also agree with you when you say, and this is where you change my mind, like you can only do so much on your own, and you have to do that work. Like you have to be confident. I think you have to know who you are. You have to know what your values are. You have to know what you want. But that external validation of finding someone that can kind of almost confirm that they see you in the way you see yourself, and that they don't have the same reactions or the same, I guess, triggers of a past relationship. And this can go beyond dating. This can be with family and friends too, in my opinion. But it really did change my perspective to say, okay, like I don't have to be 100%. I can be 80 or 90% and then get that other 10 or 20% and, prove I'm lovable, prove that the way I see myself is the way someone else can see me. And I think that really changed kind of the way I look at it and my perspective on it. So I do thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is corrective experiences in a nutshell. When we have a core belief, which is developed from these early life experiences, and it becomes the lens through which we see the world. So if the message a caregiver sent us over and over was, you're not that important because they didn't make time for us, that becomes our lens. Our needs are just not that important. But when we go into a relationship and somebody can provide a corrective experience and can show you that, no, you're worth prioritizing, you are important, you are valuable, that shifts that core belief. And so there's so much stigma around that as well, like that external validation. And I have a quote somewhere on my Instagram page where I wrote, if you seek external validation, it probably means you're normal, because that's what we want. We want to be accepted.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think too, like if you take it a little step further, and it's like, if someone doesn't accept you, like that's not your people. If you know who you are and you're confident in it, let the right people come to you. You will attract them. They will be attracted to you. And that's when you kind of get that synergy of being in a group that's meant for you, or in a relationship that's meant for you.
That's exactly it. And that's, and I always have to like point out the gray when I talk about this stuff, because yes, there is a point where it becomes too much validation seeking. There is a point. Yes, both ends of the spectrum are dysfunction, but there is this middle ground. And that's exactly it. That your people, the people who you feel safe with, are going to make you feel accepted. And that's a beautiful thing.
Before I let you ask me anything you want to ask, what is some final advice, I guess, that you would give to someone to come out and work towards a healthy relationship after the toxicity? You've done the work, you're ready to get that little bit of outside validation you want. Like, how do you avoid stepping into the same issue again?
So I suggest starting by making your list of 5 needs. These are your non-negotiables in a relationship, your 5 wants. These are your preferences, and your 5 boundaries, your deal breakers. And by starting with that and having a very clear understanding of your expectations in a relationship, having a very clear understanding of your own core values is crucial. And then also knowing your triggers and how you show up when you're triggered. Those are some of the main things. So self-awareness is essentially what I'm saying, like has to exist.
In a nutshell. No, that's so true.
Yeah.
Now I feel like we need to do a whole nother episode, because I want to hear your 5 things you need, 5 things you want, and 5, what was the other one? 5 things?
Boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Needs, wants, and boundaries. And now I get to ask you that, because I'm about to be able to ask you anything I want. So
I just set myself up for that one. Jeez. Well, yeah, I have at it, I guess.
Okay, I'll just ask you, because I have asked you this before. Actually, on my you were my very first guest on. We're like having all these milestones with each other on Relatable.
I
And I had asked you the needs, wants, and boundaries. So let's just hear. So that would be interesting because that was like probably about 9 months ago or so.
Yeah.
So let's hear how that's shifted. I'm going to have to go back and listen. So what are two of your needs, wants, and boundaries? So needs being non-negotiable, has to exist.
Yeah. So I'll do 3 because I actually have 3. I don't have 5.
Okay. Going for that gold star.
Yeah, exactly. A little extra credit here. So there's 5 things that I know I need in a relationship. One is trust, and that's not basic. I'm assuming basic trust is there. You're not going to cheat. You're going to respect the relationship and so on. But I want, I want that trust that no matter what comes up or no matter what's there, that there's like a trust that we are always in this together, and that there's that sort of element to everything that we do. So you don't have to worry about like the doubt trickling in, or the new follow and the liking of a girl's stuff or whatever. Like that stuff, I don't want to deal with any of that. I don't have time for it. Maybe similar to kind of what you were saying earlier. I just want that trust to be there. I don't think it's something that I want to have to worry about. Stability is a big one. And this kind of goes a little with what I said with trust, but like, I want to know that the foundation that we have built is something that we can, I would love to say, get through anything, but that's obviously not the case. But that stability is there, that I know that you're there, you know that I'm there, and we know that we're going to do everything we can to attack any conflict together and not against each other. So like, take the conflict here, put it over there. No, we're going to try and solve it together. And then the other one is quality time, which is my number one love language. I want to be able to spend time with my significant other, alone, with friends, with family, with other people, separately, just the two of us, friends, family, all of that, doing things that are sort of building a healthier relationship. Things that I want someone that may do something with me that they don't necessarily enjoy, but they enjoy experiencing it with me because it's something I enjoy. I don't know if that's, and that's something that nothing makes me happier than when I see someone that I'm with experiencing something that's super important to them, even if I don't like it. Now, there's a handful of things I won't do. Like I won't skydive, I won't bungee jump, I can't go to an endless amount of concerts, but I will go to some. So there's like maybe that's a boundary then too, but that's one of them. Another one is that I really want someone who wants to have like a dog. I mean, I can't imagine not having a dog. Maybe that should be like my 4th requirement, but someone who likes having pets. And I've warmed up to cats a little bit too. So that's an option as well. And then what would be a third want? Oh, I know what a third want is. I like to walk, and that's how I decompress. I take walks. I get worst days, 15,000 steps. Sometimes I get 30,000 steps. So I would love someone that likes kind of bopping around and just walking around and not having necessarily a whole day planned other than, hey, let's just go wander around and find something to do or find something that interests us. I really enjoy doing that. And when I have had that in relationships, it's like something I've noticed is something I really like having.
That creates experiential foreplay is what we would call that. And essentially creating new adventures together and having new experiences.
I love that. That's a great point. And then boundaries, right? That was the other one.
Yes.
I'm an introvert. I need time to be by myself, recharge by myself. I like to listen to podcasts. Sometimes I want to go on those walks alone. Let's be clear about that. I also feel like, and this one's really hard, and I know that there's always going to be slip ups, but like, I want to healthily have conflict because I think conflict's normal. And my boundary is I will not tolerate someone being disrespectful or attacking like me as a person. And that's not even just in relationships. Like that was one of the things that really bothered me about what Nick Vile said a few weeks back, because he called me a motherfucker and just was like insulting me as a human, like not the idea, because I don't think you can attack the idea. So it's like, and that's the idea of the You Can Foundation, where everyone in reality shows deserves mental health and legal support before, during, and post show. For those of you who don't know, you should all know by now. But, I feel like insults and personal attacks are a huge boundary for me. Like, I just completely disengage. And if I don't, then the snarky comes. So that's a learned behavior. And when the snarky comes, that's when it's, escalated. I guess that's really it. I guess I'm really good at boundaries usually, but in a relationship, I don't know. Maybe not so good.
There you go. Maybe take some time to think through it.
That's a good point. Very good point.
Okay. Well, I have one more question for you. In the, I guess, nature of toxic conversation, if you had to give us your one toxic trait, so not a real toxic trait, but you know how they have like all the memes, my toxic trait is.
Oh, yeah.
What would be your funny toxic trait?
Oh, my funny toxic trait? Oh, my gosh.
I'm really putting you on the spot here.
I know. I feel like I have a lot of them. I think it's like my sarcasm, like overall, and my dry sense of humor. People don't get it. And it kind of makes me think like, oh, maybe I'm not that funny. So maybe my toxic trait is I think I'm funny and I'm not that funny.
Sounds to me like you're saying my toxic trait is I'm a lot smarter than the average person and they can't keep up.
Well, I didn't want to say that, but ironically, my barber said that to me today, who manages a couple shops. And when he was cutting my hair today, he's like, yeah, he's like, these people at the new shop, like they think they're manipulating me. And he's like, they don't understand I'm smarter than they are. And I see this coming a mile away and this isn't working and you're not going to pit me against other people. And so funny. Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
My level of wit is a little bit higher than others.
Which takes intelligence. So I'll give you that. All right. That's all I got.
Well, thank you. Where can people find you?
Yes. So my website is drelizabethfedrick.com. I'm on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. And those are the main two places that I can be found. I'm on other socials, but Instagram is where you can find me most actively.
So you're on TikTok too. We'll put
I am on TikTok. Same at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick on all of those. But yeah, I'm not doing a whole lot on there.
Post and ghost. That's what I do on TikTok.
Yep, you got it.
But yeah, thank you. And we'll put all those links down there, including the link to your book when that comes out. And if when it does come out, if this comes out before that, then we'll pop it in there after the fact. So make sure you check that out. And thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.